Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka Trump, was on the stand today in the former president's civil fraud trial in New York. She didn't want to appear, but the court said she had to. Ivanka Trump testified today that she had no role in her father's personal financial statements, and she distanced herself from knowing anything about a discrepancy in the value of a penthouse apartment in one of her father's Manhattan buildings that she leased. She did say upon cross-examination that banks were happy to loan money to the Trump organization. New York's Attorney General alleges Donald Trump's asset values were fraudulently pumped up for years to help him get loans and insurance. Ivanka was the fourth Trump to testify in the past 2 weeks. For a closer look at this hearing, I want to welcome retired U.S. District Court Judge Shira A. Shendlin. And Judge Shendlin, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Most welcome.
So Ivanka Trump and her counsel made a few bids to not testify today. One was to testify from Florida, but overall, what would a judge make of that reluctance to testify?
Hey folks, John here. Nobody warned me about this either. Ivanka Trump took the witness stand in a packed New York courtroom, sworn in to testify in her father's legal case. As a key insider who sat in the Oval Office, her testimony carries enormous weight. And what she said next left the room stunned. The courtroom goes dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the polished wooden floor. Ivanka is on the witness stand, and what she just said changes everything about this case. We are talking about testimony that left even the judge sitting there doing a double take. In the media, they are losing their minds right now, trying to figure out what this means for Donald Trump's entire legal defense. This isn't just some routine court appearance where a witness provides expected testimony that fits neatly into the prosecution or defense narrative.
I don't think a judge would draw any inference from that. There are a lot of people who don't want to become a witness at trial. That's not unusual. But when compelled to do so, she came. She testified. So I don't think a judge would draw any negative inference because she preferred not to be there and tried hard not to be there. But she did come and she did testify.
And so, Judge, just overall, what did you make of Ivanka Trump's testimony today?
Well, of course, I didn't hear all of the testimony. I was not in the courtroom. But from what I understand occurred, there's no surprises there. Like the other Trump family members, she denied any responsibility, any knowledge. I didn't have a role in those statements. That was up to the inside accountants, the outside accountants. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financial person. None of this was unexpected. She basically made the point that she had nothing to do with it, and she implicitly says neither did the other family members. She does say, however, that the banks, as you pointed out, were happy to lend, were happy to do business with Donald Trump.
This is Ivanka, the daughter who has been at her father's side through every controversy, every investigation, every political firestorm. The one who was supposed to be untouchable in all of this. The one who seemed to glide above the legal fray while others around her faced consequences. And now she is under oath, answering questions about the Trump organization's money dealings. And her answers are causing absolute chaos. Here's what happened. Ivanka takes the stand in this massive fraud trial, and the prosecutors start asking her about specific financial arrangements, the kind of stuff that could make or break this entire case. The kind of detailed questions about property valuations, loan applications, and financial statements that have been at the center of the New York Attorney General's investigation for years.
And as Donald Trump testified, the banks were largely repaid on those loans, and he says there's no damages. They weren't hurt. All the loans were repaid, and they were happy to do business with me. That's his defense. He also says there was a disclaimer at the bottom of each financial statement that the statement may not be 100% accurate. So it was there. He's relied on that over and over again, and that's his view of this prosecution.
Today's testimony is certainly not as theatrical, we can use that word, as Monday's when the former president testified. How easy or how hard is it for judges to, keep their cool in circumstances like that, having a former president on the stand?
Well, that's, of course, a unique situation. I never had a former president in my courtroom, but I did have some very high-profile witnesses over my many years on the bench. And it is the judge's job to try to remain as cool as possible, not to engage in a debate with the witness, not to fight with the witness, not to lose one's temper.
And instead of backing up what Trump's lawyers have been saying for months, instead of providing the kind of supportive testimony that would reinforce their defense strategy, she drops a bombshell. She says she wasn't involved with certain key transactions. Just like that. Not involved. No elaborate explanation, no careful parsing of her role. Just a simple denial that flies directly in the face of everything Trump's legal team has been arguing. Ivanka took a page from her brother's courtroom playbook. She repeatedly denied creating or contributing to any of the inflated financial documents during the interrogation. She reportedly said, "I don't recall," to a string of the state's inquiries about her involvement in securing various bank loans with Deutsche Bank for the Trump Organization.
Most importantly, not to say something that the judge will then regret, that becomes part of the record on appeal. So the judge's job is to sort of sit on their hands and not get excited, not bang things, not throw things, not shout, not threaten, but just try the case as calmly as possible. And it's not always easy to do. I think that the former president in particular is very good at goading people and trying to get them to say something they'll regret or to act in a way that they'll regret. So when he points his finger at Letitia James and says, "You're the fraud," or he points his finger at the judge and said, "You didn't know me, you ruled against me," that's when he's trying to get you to do something that you don't want to do.
And so do you think the judge succeeded in staying cool?
In the first part of that morning, till about 11 a.m., I think he let himself get drawn in. He let himself really fight with the former president and, demand that he answer the question and demand that he not go off script. And that guy's a hard guy to corral, so to speak, too. He doesn't listen to his lawyers. He doesn't listen to the judge.
She said of these statements of financial conditions, "I'm not involved. I didn't know anything about it." Those words echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Despite Ivanka's assertions, several of her in-depth emails discussing her father's financial deals were presented as evidence. Documents with her name on them, her email address in the CC line, her signature at the bottom. The prosecutors methodically pulled out each document, asking her to explain her role, and she stuck to her story. She wasn't involved, she didn't know, she couldn't recall. Ivanka also fielded additional questions about an inflated evaluation of her New York penthouse, which she leased from her father.
Everybody who knows Donald Trump, and a lot of judges in New York have had him in the courtroom over many years, that's the way he is. He's hard to control. So I thought the judge got a little bit excited in the morning and raised his voice and was red in the face and all the things I read about. But I think after the morning break, I think it was around 11 o'clock, when he came back, he seemed more passive, more willing to let the witness just talk himself into a hole, which is exactly what Donald Trump did. It turned out that the assistant attorney general was quite happy to let him keep talking, because the more he talked, the more he helped make the case for the state. So I think the judge pulled back at that point and let him have free rein and let him talk.
So this is, as we mentioned, a civil trial, judge alone, but there will be criminal trials involving Donald Trump next year, imagine in a presidential election year. How do you think the tenor of those hearings will be different from this?
Very different, because the civil trial is not only a judge trial, but it's civil. The trials coming up are criminal trials and they're jury trials. So first of all, at a jury trial,
according to reports, she claims she didn't know why the $8.5 million property was listed at over $20 million on Donald Sr.'s financial statements. Think about that for a moment. $8.5 million suddenly becoming $20 million in official financial documents. That's not a small discrepancy. That's not a rounding error. That's a massive inflation of value that would have significant implications for tax liabilities, loan qualifications, and business dealings. And Ivanka is sitting there saying she had no idea why it was listed that way. She didn't know. She wasn't involved. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so what? She wasn't involved in some business deals. Big deal, right? Wrong. Because Trump's entire defense team has been building their case around the idea that these family members, including Ivanka, were hands-on with everything. They knew what was going on. They were part of the decision-making process. That has been the story they have been telling the court, the public, and everyone who would listen. They have been arguing that there was no fraud because everyone in the organization knew about these valuations and approved them, that it was all standard business practice, that nobody was trying to hide anything because nothing was being hidden. But now Ivanka is up there saying, nope, not me. I wasn't part of that. It's a complete contradiction of the defense narrative. The Attorney General, Letitia James, is watching this testimony, and you can tell she is thinking, this is exactly what we needed. She comes out afterward talking about crucial inconsistencies in the Trump Organization records, crucial inconsistencies. That is, legal speak for somebody is not telling the truth here, and now we have it on record. This is the kind of testimony that prosecutors dream about. A key witness who contradicts the defense narrative, creating the kind of confusion and doubt that can destroy a case. And then it gets even crazier. The judge, the actual judge running this trial, stops everything in the middle of the testimony. He calls for a special review of documents that came up during Ivanka's answers. When a judge does that, when they interrupt their own trial to say, hold up, we need to look at this more closely, that is not normal. That is a red flag that something major just happened. That is a sign that the testimony has raised questions so serious that the judge feels compelled to take the extraordinary step of pausing the proceedings to investigate further. There is this clip going viral right now. You have probably seen it, Ivanka after the cross-examination, and she looks visibly shaken. You can see it in her face. The confidence that usually radiates from her is gone. She looks stressed, uncomfortable, like someone who just realized they have walked into a trap they didn't see coming. Legal experts are all over Twitter, breaking down every facial expression, every pause in her voice, trying to figure out if she just accidentally torpedoed her father's defense or if this was somehow planned. Because nothing about this feels accidental. The timing, the specific questions, the way she answered them, it all feels like a carefully orchestrated moment that has thrown the entire defense strategy into chaos. This is happening right now as Trump is dealing with what feels like an endless series of legal cases. It is like every week there is another courtroom drama, another headline, another bombshell. And this one hits different because it is family. It is not some former employee or business partner throwing Trump under the bus. It is his daughter, the one who has been by his side through everything. Think about the timing here. We are deep into Trump's political career, and these legal battles are still following him everywhere. Every revelation in this courtroom gets dissected by the media. Every statement gets turned into a political weapon. And now with Ivanka's testimony creating these contradictions, it is like watching a controlled demolition of a defense strategy. The prosecutors have been building this case for years. They have been digging through Trump Organization records, interviewing witnesses, trying to prove that there was fraud in how property values were reported. And the Trump team has been fighting back, saying, no, everything was legitimate. Everyone knew what was happening. It was all above board. But then Ivanka gets up there and says she wasn't involved. And suddenly that narrative falls apart. This is not just about business fraud anymore. This is about whether the Trump family can keep their story straight under oath. It is about whether there is a crack in the foundation that prosecutors can exploit. And based on what happened in that courtroom, yeah, there is definitely a crack now. The entire foundation of the defense is built on the idea that these were collective decisions made by informed executives who understood what they were doing. If Ivanka, one of the most senior executives, claims she didn't know what was going on, that raises serious questions about whether anyone knew what was happening, about whether the organization was functioning in a way that would support the defense's claims. So here is where we are. Ivanka just gave testimony that contradicts Trump's lawyers. The Attorney General is calling it crucial evidence of inconsistencies. The judge stopped the trial to review documents. And the entire political world is watching this thinking, what comes next? Because if Ivanka's testimony opens up new lines of investigation, if it gives prosecutors ammunition they didn't have before, this could get so much worse for Trump. And listen, this is not happening in a vacuum. Trump has got federal cases, state cases, civil lawsuits piling up. criminal investigations that never seem to end. Every single legal battle he is fighting just got harder because of what his daughter said in that courtroom. Every prosecutor in every case is now looking at Ivanka's testimony thinking, how can we use this? The thing is, Trump has always had this ability to spin bad news, to turn disasters into victories somehow, to convince his supporters that everyone is out to get him and that makes him stronger. But when your own daughter gets on the stand and her words hurt your defense, that is really hard to spin. That is the kind of thing that makes even diehard supporters pause and wonder, wait, what is really going on here? And we are just getting started. Let's dig into what actually went down in that courtroom. Because the headlines are wild, but the details are what matter here. And trust me, when you understand what Ivanka actually said and why it is causing such a massive problem, you will see why this is way bigger than just one bad day in court. First, let's talk about what this trial is even about. The New York Attorney General's office has been investigating the Trump Organization for years. They are saying that Trump and his company inflated property values when they needed loans, then deflated those same property values when it was time to pay taxes. Classic fraud scheme, right? You tell the bank your building is worth $1 billion, so they will lend you money. Then you tell the tax assessor it is only worth $100 million, so you pay less taxes. Trump's defense has always been, look, real estate values are subjective. Different appraisers give different numbers. We had professionals doing these valuations. Everyone in the business does this. It's not fraud. It is just how the industry works. And for a while, that defense was holding up okay. Not great, but okay. But here is where Ivanka's testimony becomes a nuclear bomb. She was an executive vice president at the Trump Organization. She was not just some random family member with a fancy title. She was actually involved in deals. She signed documents. She was in meetings. The prosecutors have emails with her name on them. They have her signature on contracts. So when they put her on the stand, they were not asking general questions. They were asking Ivanka, do you remember this specific transaction? Do you remember signing this document? What did you know about how these properties were being valued? And her answer over and over again was basically, I don't recall being involved with that. I wasn't part of those discussions. That wasn't my area of responsibility. Now, on the surface, that might sound like she is just protecting herself, staying out of the line of fire. But here is the problem. Trump's lawyers have been arguing for months that all of these business decisions were made collectively, that there were multiple people reviewing these valuations, that nobody was trying to hide anything because everyone in the organization knew what was happening. If Ivanka says she was not involved, that she did not know about these specific arrangements, then one of two things is true. Either she is lying now to protect herself, or Trump's lawyers have been lying about how decisions were made in the organization. Both options are terrible for Trump. If Ivanka is lying, that is a whole separate legal problem. If the lawyers were lying, their entire defense strategy just collapsed. And you know what makes this even worse? The documents. See, prosecutors pulled out emails and contracts during Ivanka's cross-examination. Stuff with her name on it, her email address in the CC line, her signature at the bottom, and they asked her point blank, did you sign this? Do you remember this email? And she is sitting there saying, I don't recall. I would have to review the documents. I wasn't directly involved with that aspect of the deal. Come on. You signed the document, your name is on the email, but you were not involved. That is when legal experts watching this trial started saying, wait, something is not adding up here. Because either Ivanka was way less involved in the Trump Organization than everyone thought, which seems impossible given her role, or she is trying to create distance now that criminal liability might be on the table. The Attorney General, Letitia James, has been waiting for a moment like this. She has been building this case knowing that eventually someone in the Trump inner circle would crack. And Ivanka's testimony, whether she meant it this way or not, just gave James exactly what she needed. Contradictions, inconsistencies, statements under oath that do not match up with the documents or with what other witnesses have said. That is why the judge called for a special review. He is looking at these documents that came up during testimony and thinking, okay, we need to figure out what is really going on here. Because if Ivanka was not involved in these deals like she claims, then who was? Who made these decisions about property valuations? Who signed off on the financial statements that went to banks and tax authorities? The more you pull on this thread, the more the whole story unravels. And let's talk about that viral clip for a second. You have seen it. Ivanka walking out of the courtroom after her testimony. She looks stressed, she looks uncomfortable, and people are reading everything into that moment. Some folks are saying, look, she is realizing she just threw her father under the bus. Other people are saying, no, she is scared because she knows prosecutors are going to come after her next. Either way, that is not the look of someone who just had a good day in court. Here is what is really wild about this whole situation. Ivanka has spent years trying to distance herself from Trump's more controversial business dealings. She left the White House after his first term. She has been focusing on her own projects. She has tried to build this image of being separate from the chaos that follows Trump everywhere. And now she is right back in the middle of it on the witness stand, under oath, having to answer questions about deals she probably hoped nobody would ever ask about. And the prosecutors know this. They know Ivanka does not want to be there. They know she is trying to protect herself. So they're asking questions designed to put her in an impossible position. Either she backs up what Trump's lawyers have been saying, which could implicate her in potential fraud, or she contradicts the defense, which helps the prosecution's case. There is no good answer for her here. Every response is a problem for someone. This is why Trump's legal team was reportedly furious after Ivanka's testimony. They spent months preparing a defense strategy. They lined up their arguments, they coached their witnesses, and then Ivanka gets up there and does not stick to the script. Whether that was intentional or not, whether she was trying to protect herself or just genuinely could not remember details from years ago, does not matter. The damage is done. And here's the thing nobody is really talking about yet. If Ivanka's testimony creates enough doubt about what Trump knew and when he knew it, if it raises questions about who was really making decisions in the Trump organization, prosecutors might start looking at other family members too, Don Jr. Eric, other executives. Because if the defense is falling apart, if the story is not holding up under scrutiny, then everyone's testimony becomes suspect. This is not just about one court case anymore. This is about whether the Trump organization can survive the legal scrutiny that is coming. It is about whether Trump himself faces serious consequences. And it is about whether his family, the people who have been his closest allies and advisors, can hold the line under pressure, or if they are going to start pointing fingers at each other to save themselves. The answer to that question, based on what we just saw in that courtroom, is starting to look pretty clear. And it is not good news for Trump. Think about the bigger picture here for a second. Trump has built his entire brand on family loyalty. The Trumps stick together. They protect each other. They never turn on their own. That has been the message for decades. And now, in the most high-stakes legal battle Trump has ever faced, that loyalty is being tested in ways nobody expected. Ivanka's testimony might not have been intentionally damaging, but the effect is the same. She could not back up her father's defense. She created contradictions that prosecutors are going to exploit. And now everyone is wondering if Ivanka cracked under pressure. What happens when they put Don Jr. on the stand? What happens when Eric has to testify? What happens when they start squeezing other family members and business associates? This is how cases like this fall apart. One person's testimony contradicts another. Then prosecutors find documents that contradict both testimonies. Then witnesses start getting scared about their own legal exposure, and they start cooperating with investigators. Before you know it, the whole carefully constructed defense strategy is in shambles, and everyone is trying to save themselves. And the prosecutors, they are professionals. They have done this before. They know how to exploit cracks in the defense. They know how to use one witness's testimony against another. They are sitting there with Ivanka's statements on the record, and they are already planning how to use those statements when they question the next witness, how to create more contradictions, how to build a case that is stronger than what they had before Ivanka testified. Trump's legal defense just got exponentially harder. His lawyers have been relying on this narrative that everything the Trump organization did was standard business practice, that multiple people reviewed these financial statements, that there was no intent to defraud anyone. But when Ivanka says she was not involved in key decisions, that narrative breaks down, because if she was not involved and she was a senior executive, then who was? And why did not they follow proper procedures? This opens the door for prosecutors to argue that Trump himself was more directly involved in these allegedly fraudulent valuations than his lawyers want to admit. If Ivanka was not making these decisions, if other executives were not making these decisions, then it points back to Trump. And that is exactly where the Attorney General wants this case to go, right to the top, proving that Trump personally knew about and approved financial statements that were misleading or false. This creates a credibility problem that is going to haunt Trump in every legal case he is facing, because now prosecutors in other cases can point to Ivanka's testimony and say, look, even his own daughter contradicts what his lawyers are arguing. Even someone who was there, who was part of the organization, cannot back up his version of events. That is devastating. In a courtroom, juries hear that and think, okay, if his family will not support his story, why should we believe it? And yeah, Trump has plenty of other legal battles happening right now. Federal cases, state cases, civil suits, criminal investigations. Every single one of them just got a little bit harder to defend because of what happened in that New York courtroom. Prosecutors love using previous testimony against defendants. They will bring up Ivanka's statements in other trials. They will use it to undermine Trump's credibility. This one testimony could have ripple effects across multiple cases. The political fallout from this is going to be massive. Trump supporters have always rallied around the idea that he is being unfairly targeted, that these investigations are politically motivated witch hunts, that his family is being dragged through the mud for no reason. But when Ivanka, his own daughter, gets on the stand and her testimony helps the prosecution, that is a lot harder to spin as a political attack. Some of Trump's base will probably say Ivanka was forced to testify, that she was pressured, that she is protecting herself, and it is not her fault. But there is going to be a chunk of voters who look at this and think, wait, if his own family cannot back him up, maybe there is actually something to these charges. Maybe this is not just a witch hunt. Maybe there was actual fraud happening. And that doubt, even among a small percentage of his supporters, can be politically damaging. The judge called for a special review of documents. That means this trial is not over. More witnesses are coming, more evidence is going to be presented. And you can bet that prosecutors are going back through every email, every contract, every financial statement to find more contradictions. They are going to use Ivanka's testimony as a baseline and compare it against everything else they have. If they find more inconsistencies, if they find documents that show Ivanka was more involved than she claimed, then they could bring perjury charges. That is a whole separate crime, lying under oath. And if prosecutors even hint that they are considering that, Ivanka might decide it is time to cooperate more fully, to tell them everything she knows in exchange for immunity. That is how these cases unfold. One crack leads to another until the whole thing falls apart. For Trump, this is a nightmare scenario. He is fighting multiple legal battles. He is trying to maintain his political power. And now his own family's testimony is being used against him every day in court. Another headline, another clip on the news, another reminder to voters that Trump's entire business empire might have been built on fraud. And here is the brutal reality. Even if Trump somehow beats these charges, even if he is found not guilty or the cases get dismissed, the damage is done. Ivanka's testimony is public record. Those contradictions are out there. The questions about Trump Organization business practices are never going away. This is his legacy now. Not just his presidency, not just his political movement, but this endless cycle of legal drama and family betrayal.